Hello and welcome to another edition of the podcast. Today we will be discussing about racism, especially in London Borough of Tower Hamlets and in general around the country in the UK. I have a special guest today, a veteran anti-racist campaigner. He is none other than Rajan Uddin Jalal. Most people know him. He's very well known within the Bangladeshi community. So I will be interviewing him and asking him questions about how he came about being a campaigner, what made him become a campaigner. As we know, over the years, racism has evolved and changed names, changed faces. So I will be delving into different aspects of racism. Um, Welcome to the show, Rajanuddin Jalal Bhai. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam, Ruhul. Thank you for having me. And I hope that we'll have a fruitful discussion about issues of concern to the wider community.
Sure. Yeah, so basically Rajuddin Jalal, he's a very well-known figure within the Bangladeshi community. He's played a crucial part in the anti-racist movement in the 70s and 80s. So can I ask you, how did you get involved in the anti-racist movement? What was the reason?
But uh, back in the early 1970s, the whole community was under siege,
Okay.
following on from the rivers foaming of blood, racist speech by then MP Powell. There was a period of Paki bashing. So the everyday experience for our people in the East End of London was one of being beaten up, insulted, uh, derogatory remarks being made about them. We were not safe anywhere in the East End of London. And so a group of us, young people, who used to meet in the Asian Studies Center in Mardell Street, London E1, we decided that we needed to form an organization to tackle racism. And so back in 1976, under the guidance of our teacher, late Shah Lutfur Rahman, we formed the Bangladeshi Youth Movement for Equal Rights. And I was one of the key players, young players within the organization. And it is through that organization I got engaged in anti-racist mobilizations, movements, and activities. And since then, the Bangladeshi youth movement played a historical role in fighting against racism and fascism. And the organization still exists today, but in a different form. People like me are now older people. So there you are. That's how I got involved.
Yeah. Can you share some like personal experiences, in terms of racism? What sort of racism you actually experienced back in the 70s?
Well, okay, if you went to public places, you could not enter them, partly because there were signs on the doors.
No.
It says, no Irish, no blacks, no Pakis. So that was the atmosphere. Uh,
Mm.
those signboards sent you a message in letting you know that you were not wanted. Then you also knew that when you went out onto the street, you were not safe, because back in the early 70s, because of the Paki bashing that was perpetrated by the skinhead hooligans who were supported by the National Front racist political party, you were not safe. So you would be attacked, beaten, or you'd find that gangs of white youths would attack you suddenly coming out of cars. And the simple message was, Peki, go back to where you come from. They also had the impression that we were taking jobs and housing that belonged to natives. But the fact of the matter was that we came to this country because of the empire. It is the historical connection between Britain and the countries it colonized. Secondly, the kind of jobs that we used to do in various industries like catering and clothing and garments, no other person wanted to do it. And that is why there were jobs available for migrant workers. You wanted me to tell you about incidents. The one incident that I can tell you about my own experience, and that is once I went to the local fun fair in the Big Land Green Park behind Mulberry School. And I was on my own and I got beaten up badly by a group of local white youths. And the next thing I knew is that I woke up in the accident and emergency department in the London hospital. So that's one example, and that's a common example of every Bangladeshi or black person who used to live in the East End of London. The whole community was under siege. There were no-go areas in the East End of London. So there were areas that you did not venture out to if you were a Bengali. The only relatively safe place for us was the E1 area, which is Spitalfields, Bangla Town, the western edge of Tower Hamlets. The other places like Bow, Bethnal Green, Wapping were no-go areas for our people.
Right. So how have racism evolved over the decades from the 70s till now?
Well, initially it was physical violence against our people. And so, of course, you will also know about the racist murder of Al-Sab Ali on the 4th of May, 1978. He was murdered by 3 white youths. And then a few weeks later, Ishaq Ali, another Bengali, was murdered in Hackney Road, which borders between Tower Hamlets and Hackney. And so these were the serious incidents. And of course, our older generation used to think that they will temporarily reside here and eventually go back to Bangladesh. But the younger generation, people like myself, who came to this country as third generation migrants through family vouchers with our parents, we decided that enough was enough. It was our right to stay here in this country. We had the entitlement, and our future was going to be here. And that is why we decided that we'll fight back against racism. So we formed community organizations, we formed vigilante groups to protect our communities. There were various organizations like the Bengali Housing Action Group, which was engaged in providing housing through squatting for homeless people. And of course, the murder of Al-Tab Ali proved to be a turning point for our community, because following on from that murder, there was a large demonstration which started from the Whitechapel Churchyard, which is now known as Al-Tab Ali Park. And about 10,000 people, Bengalis and anti-racists, marched through the streets of London and ended up with a rally in Hyde Park Corner. And on the way back, a petition was delivered to 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister's office, demanding protection, equality, freedom, and justice. And to the best of my knowledge, for the first time, following on from that demonstration, a small 2-inch column was written about the Bangladeshi community and our issues and our plight and our aspirations, because the mainstream media did not expose our community in any way. There was no recognition of our presence in this country. And I believe that was the turning point, which later led to other activities, events, challenging racism. And so what you have got is, for the first time, the public authorities became alerted to the presence of the Bengali community and the issues that we were facing. So back in the early 1970s, we did not have access to health services properly. We did not have access to public services through the local council. And of course, the establishment did not recognize our presence. And so the turning point meant that gradually our movement against racism and fascism was gaining momentum. And later on, it brought about a lot of changes. So you had changes in political representation through political parties. People started establishing cultural projects, educational projects. And of course, I think by the early 1980s, Ken Livingstone became the leader of the GLC, Greater London Council. And he was one of the anti-racist leaders in London. And in my opinion, he played a vital role in supporting the Bengali and Black communities in the East End of London through resources, through policy, and of course, being openly in support of the presence of our communities.
Yeah. Obviously, I grew up in the 80s. I actually faced and experienced some racism, but maybe not as much as yourself because you grew up in the 60s and the 70s. And racism was really, really rife, and racism was really on the face at the time and physical. But I think the turning point for a lot of BAME community came in the 80s. I think it was in the 80s when people realized that we aren't going back. This is our home. We need to establish ourselves here. We need to do business. We need to educate ourselves, and that is when I came in the 80s. I saw a lot of Bengalis actually coming to the UK as a family, and I think like you said, after the Altawali murder, that was the main turning point for us as Bengalis living in Termes, or London. And another thing, have you realized how the names changed over the decades? Like first in the 70s, it was the skinheads, the National Front. Then it became the BNP, who are the main instrumental party, the racist party, political party. They actually took many seats in the, in 1990s, early 1990s in Tamils. And then you had the in EDL, the English Defense League, recently. And then we have another group which are totally anti-Muslim. But one thing I've realized is that in the 70s and 80s, it was mainly racism was mainly towards the BAME community, especially the people who came from the Indian subcontinent, like Bangladesh, Indian, Pakistanis. But now the racism tends to be more concentrated towards the Muslims. Have you realized this, and why do you think that is?
Well, I think the first point to make is this: when Maggie Thatcher became the Prime Minister of the country, she stated that Britain was becoming swamped by people of different cultures, and that was not acceptable. And the same message is now being repeated by people of my color and your color, Swila Braverman, Priti Patel, and others. And so the racists were given the oxygen to wage their campaign of hatred against people of color, Black people, and brown people. And of course, there have been a number of racist murders which were widely publicized. And so the racist forces who used to belong to the National Front political party back in the 70s changed their color many times and their names, but it was the same old racism that they were dashing out. And so obviously you will also know that Derek Beacon, a racist from the BNP, was elected in Tower Hamlets.
Yeah.
I was a councillor at the time. And so what you found is this racism was not only against Muslims or Bengalis, it was against people of color. And I think we have got to remember the wider definition and not make it limited to our community only. And of course, following on from that racist comment by Prime Minister Maggie Thatcher, the racist elements were getting the momentum for persecuting people of color and, of course, Muslims as well. Islamophobia became a phenomenon later on and widespread, and it is still present today. And this is how the racist forces have been operating over the last 50 years that I have been an activist myself in the community. And so nowadays, we are actually dealing with institutionalized racism. So back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you knew who the enemies were. There were bigoted, racist people on the streets. But in the following decades, over the last 20 or 25 years, we have been dealing with the suited and booted, respectable racists. And hence, the coining of the term institutionalized racism. And a number of reports have been produced which confirm that racism is still prevalent in society today. And although the street level racism is no longer as extreme as it used to be, or as frequent as used to be, but there are still incidents of racial attacks and violence against our people. But for the last 20 years, we have been fighting against institutionalized racism, whether it be for gaining access to political power, gaining access to education, public services, and whatever it is. And I think there is an important report that we need to mention when we talk about the Bangladeshi community in particular terms, and that is the publication of the Home Affairs Select Committee report on Bangladeshis. And that report highlighted issues of deprivation, concern, and lack of participation and opportunities for the Bengali community. It highlighted issues around employment opportunities or the lack of it, resources for community and cultural facilities, lack of political representation. Policing was a big issue back in the 1970s and 80s. That report also touched on that. So that I think that was an instrument which exposed our situation to the wider community. And since then, the establishment and the authorities were forced to take notice of our presence. And they also knew that we were not going to go back. We were going to stay here. The slogan was here to stay, here to fight. And that movement still continues today. Although we can claim that we have made a lot of achievements in different spheres of community life, whether it be political, social, or economic, but discrimination is still there. But it is institutionalized racism that we have to fight today. And every day that you watch the television screens or the news, you will see that there is something that has been reported on, which is about institutional racism, whether it be about policing whether it be about discrimination in housing or employment matters and so on and so forth. So although our situation has improved, we have made a lot of advances and the authorities have become responsive, but we are not getting equal treatment so far. And that is why the battle needs to continue. And I think I find one sad thing that is facing our community at the moment is that when we were activists, we used to be able to call upon thousands of people to come out and campaign against racism and fascism. But nowadays, our younger generation, many of whom are children of the middle classes that we have created, are not really interested in community matters. I often go to community events where I don't see any young people, and that connection is missing. And maybe it was our failure that we have not been able to pass on the baton to our next generation. And that is what we need to do. And people like yourself and your program, I hope will be able to help us make those changes and get our younger people involved. Another sad thing I notice is this. I go on the demonstrations that happen once every 2 weeks in central London in support of Palestine. But unfortunately, the participation from our communities is very limited. Participation from our younger people is very limited. And I fail to understand why that is so. People who are concerned about Islamophobia or the freedom of Palestinian people should make it our duty to take part in activities against the genocide that's happening in Palestine at the moment. But the response that I have seen so far is not adequate. We need to do something about this. The people who go to Friday prayers in mosques all over London alone, if 10% of those people came out and supported the Palestinian cause, then we could make a big difference. And I'm making this comment because I was at a meeting last Saturday in Redbridge where young people and families came together to support the Palestinian cause. And they were saying that people from our communities are not taking part. In fact, less than 30% of the people who are supporting the Palestinian cause are Muslims or people of color. Why? Why is that? That's a big question we need to ask our people.
Yeah, Jalal bhai, yes. So basically, in terms of institutional racism, we have a big fight. There's a long road ahead. And as a young campaigner myself, I was very inspired by the likes of yourself and other members of our community. I really pay tribute and I pay my respect to you people, who made a difference and made it easier for us. But I am one of the, new generation activists. I've been campaigning for the last I've been active for the last 10 years or so, campaigning on many issues for the community. So institutional racism now, like obviously before it was like more physical, but now institutional racism, even if you look at the Met Police, we have something like around 40% people who live in the Greater London who are of BAME population, but yet we have only 2% workforce in the Met. So that's one area we need to, look into. And they really need to represent, the BAME community. And also racial profiling. We see racial profiling in many areas of societies. At the airports, people get, it's mainly the BAME community get profiled. Even there was a program recently where they showed like this guy uses one address to actually get his car insurance. So first he uses the Asian name, he gets one price, and then second time he tried with the non-Asian name, English name. And believe me or not, the price comes down 50%. So that's even the system is against us. That's how racism has evolved over is still there, and we need to like fight for the rights, and we need to be out there. And it's very sad, like you say. I think I'm one of the very few people who are trying to sort of pass on the message, inspire people out there. I always attend meetings. I'm very active in the community. And one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast or interviews is just to get the message out and connect with the young generation. Because, a lot of the meetings we have at Jalal Bhai, they're in Bengali, and a lot of the young generation, they don't understand Bengali. That is why we could not sort of connect with the young generation and inspire them to actually, come into politics, come into community activism. So that's why, I'm trying my best. I don't know how successful I will be, but if I can actually at least inspire a few people, I think I'll be content. I think I'll be happy. I know that I've done a good job. Um, I have actually inspired a good number of young people to come into politics. Yeah, that's one of the things I've done over the years. So, what what were the main sort of obstacles you faced in terms of activism back in the 80s and 90s? You mentioned, like, obviously the authorities never like responded. They did not sort of respond or respect, like when people were in trouble, or when people were attacked, when people used to call the police never arrived. I've heard stories like that. Even like we all have friends and family who used to be in the restaurant trade. Restaurant trade is a iconic trade for the Bangladeshi community. And we know, like in the 70s and the 80s, come the weekend, almost every other weekend, racists used to come into restaurants and then create fights, break up the restaurant. They damage the restaurants. And when the owners used to call the police never used to arrive. So these were some of the examples that people face. So what sort of, like when you actually sort of started campaigning or activism, uh, did you manage to get like grants easily, for the organization that you were involved with? Do what were these sort of obstacles you faced?
Well, the establishment was not interested in the community organizations that we were involved with because we were demanding change. And so what they started doing is provide funding on the basis of likes and dislikes. So funding would usually go to organizations that were um, more interested in their own uh, personal benefits. And of course, the establishment was happy to support people who were not going to challenge them too much. That was one of the obstacles. The second obstacle was that there was a problem with seeking representation through the political system. And I know you are involved with the Labour Party. I used to be a Labour councillor as well. So it was difficult to gain access to mainstream political positions because uh, as far as Tower Hamlets is concerned, from my own experience, a small clique of people led by one individual meant that a decision was taken that Bengalis should not be able to make it above the level of councillorship. So uh, uh, that is why George Galloway arrived in Tower Hamlets. And it is because of him we got our first Bengali MP.
Yes.
It wasn't for George Galloway. And of course, him keeping his promise not to stand again, then the first Bengali would not have been selected by the Labour Party. The Labour Party has been forced to uh, uh, take on board the demands of the Bengali community. Lutfur Rahman was uh, treated unfairly, although he was definitely well supported by the wider membership of the Labour Party. And of course, the whole establishment wanted to make sure that this one Bengali is not able to challenge them. But the result is that the people have stayed with him and he has proven them wrong. But unfortunately, the clique, not the Labour Party at large, a small clique, and I think you and I know the names that I am referring to, but I don't want to be taken to court for defamation.
Yeah, let's not go into names. Yeah, that's fine.
These people have not been taken to task, and they have created a problem in terms of Bengali representation, and they have tried to ensure that we did not progress any further, because given the historical political position of the Bengali community in the East End of London, we should have had people in ministerial positions long time ago, but we have been held back. Unfortunately, our problem is that uh, many of our younger people think that being a yes man to the establishment, whether it be a political party or an institution, means that you will make progress. Unfortunately, history tells us otherwise. As a Bengali, you and I will know that we had to earn our independence first from British Empire, then later from the West Pakistani army rulers, and of course, fighting back against racism and fascism in the UK tells us that you don't achieve anything by being a yes man, hoping that you will get your personal position. You bring about social, political, and economic changes by fighting back and by challenging. And that's the most important thing. And the one other thing I want to say in the context of political developments within the community is that I find it rather unfortunate that many people are chasing personal opportunities. Many people have a feeling that by being a yes man to the establishment and our masters, they will achieve glory. Unfortunately, not. That will not happen. That is not my experience. And of course, there are one or two people that are known to me within mainstream politics who are being held back and pulled back by our own people. I know only a handful of people from our community who do politics on the basis of conviction, philosophy, and ideology. But they are being held back, and the establishment, including the political party establishment, is trying to destroy them. And I think our young people must realize that being a yes man or a yes woman is not going to serve the purpose of our community. And whatever handouts you get on a temporary basis is not going to bring about lasting opportunities for the community at large. And when I talk about the community, I don't just talk about our community. When I was a councillor in my constituency, more than 70% of the voters were non-Bengalis. When I used to be the deputy leader of Tower Hamlets Council, I knew that more than 70% of the voters were non-Bengalis. So the point I'm trying to make is this: we are the custodians of this society. Our younger generations will have responsibility for the whole of the community. That means people from different cultures, different religions, and we have got to prepare for that responsibility and deliver freedom, justice, and fairness for all our people in our communities.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, one thing I've realized, like our older generation, they had conviction, they had passion for the community, they had a community spirit, which the young generation lack. And I think it's because, like, they say, hard times create strong men and easy times create weak men. I think that's what it is. When I go to different meetings, I'm always out there, like going to different meetings and seminars. You always see the elder generation, but not the young generation. So that's, I think, where we are failing as a community. Bengalis historically have been very vocal, very active. We have, especially in the Indian subcontinent, if you look at the history of the Bengalis, we were always at the forefront of leading, people of that region. But I think we just lost that spark right now. If anything, we should be more visible in the political arena. Pakistanis are way ahead of us in terms of political representation. The Indian population is way ahead in terms of political representation. I feel very good, and I pay tribute and respect to all the elders who played a crucial part to make our lives easier. you know, I've seen through and lived through a time where, in Tower Hamlets, we have right now we have two Bengali MPs, Labour MPs, Rushna Ali, Afsana Begum, and we have independent mayor, Lutfur Rahman, and then we have three more MPs. But I think we need more MPs, at least another sort of 10 to 12 MPs in the country. Bengali people, we are very politically active. I don't know why, obviously, one can say it could be the leadership or the vision of the community. I think the community, obviously, we had so many dynamics to think about. Like as a community, we had very strong links back home in Bangladesh. We had to look after our relatives, cousins. We things like that really held us back. I remember some time back, a Indian businessman, he told me, like, he goes, Ruhul, I know the history of Bengal and I know the history of Bengalis, and by God, if you had, if your elders had actually concentrated in establishing themselves in the UK, Bengalis would have been the most successful community, like the Jewish community in the UK. That's what he said. Because we are hardworking. We own the most number of businesses in terms of, like, restaurants, in the country. Number of, if you work at the number of restaurants, back in 2000, Bengalis were the most number of students who went to university. So that is a achievement in itself. We have actually made strides in many areas, but I think there's more work to do. We have graduates in every single household now. People are, people have decent jobs now.
Yeah.
But I think we need to sort of look at the Indian community, more than anything. Have they've started the Indian community, they earn the most in this country now. They have the biggest jobs, they are like the next Jewish community. So, the Jewish community and the Indian community, although they're like small in numbers, but they've made strides in every single sector. So I think, this is something the community need to sort of strive. And some of the industries or sectors, we still lack, like the medical profession, even the